My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin, and my subject is the Roman economy, including trade beyond the imperial frontiers. I have published several books on this subject, and devised the Eastern Commercial Revenue Model to explain how I think the Roman Empire operated. This is a speech I prepared for the 9th Celtic Conference in Classics at the University College Dublin in 2016. I have divided this talk into 4 presentations. This is part 3 of the talk. The question is, was the Roman economy primitive? Evidence for the ancient world comes from written accounts and archaeological remains. Pliny the Elder, who served in the advisory council of the emperor, claimed that 100 million sesterces of bullion were exported from the Roman Empire every year to pay for products from Arabia, India, and China. He reports, "By the smallest computation, India, the Chinese, and the Arabian Peninsula take 100 million sesterces from our empire every year." Regarding Roman trade in the Indian Ocean, he writes, "It is an important matter, since every year India drains more than 50 million sesterces from our empire and returns goods which are sold among us at 100 times their cost." At its height, the Roman Empire, including the legions, had operating costs of about 1,000 million sesterces per annum. Exports, worth 100 million sesterces, therefore represent a sum equivalent to about 1/10 of Roman government spending. The best evidence for the scale of this trade comes from the geographer Strabo, who was an associate of the Roman governor of Egypt. While on a tour with the governor, Strabo learnt that 120 Roman ships were sailing every year from Egypt to India. Professor Richard Goldsmith, from the Department of Economics at Yale, briefly considered the revenue potential of trade beyond the Roman frontiers in a chapter entitled "The Financial System of Augustan Rome." He reasoned that Pliny's figures represented a trade deficit, the total value of imports minus the total value of exports. Therefore, total imports must, of course, have been in excess of the negative balance of trade by the amount of exports. And, if exports covered as little as 1/2 of imports, total imports would have been in excess of 200 million sesterces. On the basis of the estimate of a value of imports of not much over 200 million sesterces, and an average duty of close to 25%, the yield of external customs duties would have been in the order of 40 million sesterces. The residuals of not more than 100 were 150 million sesterces, making some allowance for custom receipts on exports, a figure that should be regarded as a maximum. Goldsmith considered this reconstruction was credible, since it was consistent with evidence from 19th century India and Japan. Manfred Rask from Harvard and Cambridge took a different view in an influential article entitled "New Studies in Roman Commerce with the East." Rask referred to Pliny's figures as the long time snare of the gullible and the innocent. He argued that Pliny could not have had any secure knowledge of the value of Rome's exports, since he held no official position in the eastern provinces of the empire, and no post that concerned matters of high finance in imperial government. Rash also argued that it would have been impossible for any Roman authority to have known the scale of Roman exports. The value of merchandise would never have been recorded in the customs records submitted to Roman administration. There is also no evidence that the Romans taxed coinage being exported from their empire. Rask claimed that, besides Pliny, there is no genuine evidence that Roman government was concerned with a loss of bullion to the east. He argued, "It would have been impossible for the elder Pliny to obtain any accurate figures for the annual quality of the balance of payments deficit in Rome's trade with the east," adding, "There is nothing to indicate Vespasian was concerned about the drain of currency to the east apart from a rather vague allusion in a letter of Tiberius cited by Tacitus, and even here the main thrust is towards sumptuary controls. Rather than a concern with a currency drain, there is no evidence that the imperial government ever expressed concern with the hemorrhage of precious metals to the east. Rush's arguments influenced a researcher named Gary Young from the University of Tasmania, who published a book in 2001 entitled Rome's Eastern Trade. Routledge Press. Young writes, "The figures which Pliny actually quotes do not give us any real basis for calculating the volume of Eastern trade in this period, as they probably represent more stoic moralizing than usual trade statistics. If a concern did exist, why did the Roman government not act to stop or reduce the Eastern commerce?" Nevertheless, Young did try to estimate the value of Eastern trade to the Roman economy. He suggested that Pliny's figure of 100 million sesterces could mean that the empire was receiving up to 50 million sesterces per annum as revenue on international trade. This is based on the quarter rate customs tax, the tetarche, collecting 25 million sesterces on Roman exports, worth 100 million, and 25 million sesterces on returning Eastern imports, valued at the same amount. Further evidence for the scale of trade between Rome and India comes from the Musaris Papyrus. This papyrus is part of an ancient loan agreement, a legal contract stating prices assigned by government agents responsible for import tax. This document records a single Indian cargo aboard a Roman trade ship called the Hermopolitan, valued at almost 9 million sesterces. The first English translation of the Musaris Papyrus was by Professor Lionel Casson from New York University in 1985. Professor Keith Hopkins of Cambridge University gave brief consideration to the Musaris Papyrus. In 2002 he wrote, "A single document illustrates the huge scale of the trade in luxuries. We know in general terms from Pliny that Roman trade with the Middle and Far East, Arabia, India, China, was worth 100 million sesterces per year. This document now makes Pliny's valuation seem an underestimate." In 2000, Professor Rathbone of King's College London published a new translation and commentary on the Musaris Papyrus in which he considered the value of Indian imports. However, he avoided any discussion of tax revenues collected by the Roman state in Egypt, and instead focused on the value of cargo passing between Alexandria and Rome. He proposed an average tenfold markup between India, Arabia, and Alexandria, and an average doubling price between Alexandria and Rome. The experiment requires two more guesses: the average value of a shipment and the number of shipments each year. For the first, all we have is the Musaris shipment, whose total value at Alexandria after deduction of the quarter tax was equivalent to 6,926,852 sesterces. This means that Rathbone's reconstruction begins after the quarter rate import tax deduction has been made. The revenue potential of the trade is therefore not considered in this speculation. Rathbone continued, "For the second guess, we have to turn to Strabo, who claims that in the 20s BC 120 ships were sailing from Myos Homos to India, compared to 20 merchantmen in Ptolemaic times. The Ptolemaic figure is very dubious, and the Augustan one not certain. However, if we assume 100 successful shipments a year, too many, worth 7 million each, net of the quarter tax at Alexandria, this would imply annual purchases in India, Arabia, worth not less than 90 million, and annual sales in Rome and elsewhere worth not more than 1,400 million sesterces for goods on the Red Sea route alone." Expressed as an equation, the calculation would read 100 ships times 7 million sesterces, with import value at Alexandria times 2, assuming doubling of value en route to Rome, equals 1,400 million sesterces. Rathbone concluded, "This experimental speculation has no intrinsic value and is no better than the Plinian guess estimate. It just gives us an idea of what might be possible on the given assumptions." Rathbone's model therefore suggested high-value commerce, but ignored the impact of frontier trade revenues. In the same article, Rathbone dismissed the export figures provided by Pliny. This is significant because Pliny's figures do have implications for imperial revenue, Rathbone wrote. These figures go on being cited despite serious questions about their reliability. Whether or not Pliny took them from a previous author, the ultimate source is very unlikely to be official data. In his view, Pliny's figures for Eastern trade are not derived from custom taxes, but from an impression of spending in Rome. Rathbone believed that the 100 million figure is, at best, a guessed estimate of its average annual value as known in Rome based on informed gossip, assuming an equal split of the trade between the Syrian overland and the Egyptian Red Sea routes. Furthermore, the 100-fold markup claimed by Pliny is fantasy. The supposed Chinese evidence has evaporated. It does not fit with comparative evidence, and is quite incredible in conjunction with the cost-price estimate of 100 million sesterces. In conclusion, ancient historians will continue to flutter fatally around these figures like moths drawn to a candle, but while they might have been good guesses, we do not know that, and they should not be cited as empirical facts. Colin Adams from Oxford University considered Rathbone's estimates for Eastern trade in his 2007 monograph, Land Transport in Roman Egypt. He wrote, "It is unlikely, however, that trade at this level of intensity took place every year, and these figures must represent a maximum potential rather than a realistic picture of a constant state. At any rate, trade on this scale cannot be considered peripheral, and surely was a preserve of the exceptionally wealthy. However, we must be careful not to exaggerate its importance as a constant factor." Rathbone offered further opinions in his 2002 chapter, The Ancient Economy and Greco-Roman Egypt, and his 2003 work, The Financing of Maritime Commerce in the Roman Empire. He wrote, "The ancient economy, it has been said, is an academic battlefield. Indeed, it has been an academic 100 Years' War. The crippling shortage of munitions, especially of reliable, factual, quantitative data, the essential material of economic analysis, makes for indecisive encounters, but has stimulated strategic and tactical ingenuity. There is still a need of a study on Eastern commerce, which uses the latest evidence in an attempt to reconstruct the economics of the trade route, the scale of the profits, how and where they were made, and above all who, including the state, took what share of the profits and by what means of agreements and mechanisms. The results, even if tentative, would be illuminating for ancient history in general." He speculates, "Even if Pliny's claim that India received 50 million sesterces per annum through the Red Sea route alone is suspect, the Muser's papyrus impresses with one cargo with a net value at Alexandria of 7 million sesterces. But Pliny claims implausibly that the goods sold in Rome for 100 times cost price." And Rathbone asks, "Should Arabia, India and China receive 100 million per annum, doubled to include the Syrian land route?" Other leading academics continue to doubt the plausibility of ancient sources. In 2011, Professor Harris from Oxford and Columbia University published a revised article considering the Roman economy. He said, "It is tiresome to listen to ancient historians complaining about shortages of evidence, and sometimes there is an even more dire lack of imagination or of good historical method. However, it must be repeated, because there is so much wishful thinking to the contrary, that we are very badly handicapped by our inability to quantify any of the most vital aspects of the Roman economy. This means that we can scarcely do more than guess at the volume of trade in any commodity, and as Hopkins has written, we are trying to reconstruct an unknown universe." In 2007, Cambridge published The Cambridge Economic History of the Greco-Roman World, edited by Professor Sheedle, Morris and Saller from Stanford University. This publication included 28 chapters written by leading academics in a volume that claimed to be the first comprehensive one-volume survey of the economies of classical antiquity. The introduction stated, "We have two goals in this book: to summarize the state of knowledge in the ancient Greek and Roman economic history, and to contribute to shaping future research." In a publication of over 1,000 pages, there were barely 6 references to Roman trade with ancient India. On page 711, in a chapter concerning Roman Egypt, Professor Rathbone remarked, "The pseudo-statistic derived from the elder Pliny that in the later 1st century Rome was losing not less than 50 million sesterces a year on its trade through Egypt is an academic red herring." The Oxford Roman Economy Project was funded by a major Arts and Humanities Research Council grant in 2005. Professors Bowman and Wilson led an investigation into key aspects of Roman society, and in 2009 Oxrep published a 330-page introductory volume called Quantifying the Roman Economy. The book was comprised of 17 essays contributed by leading academics in Roman archaeology and ancient history. This summarized previous debate, considered controversies, and suggested new approaches for future research, as a starting point for a series of ongoing publications known as the Oxford Studies on the Roman Economy. In Quantifying the Roman Economy, Professor Andrew Wilson contributed a chapter called Approaches to Quantifying Roman Trade. Eastern trade receives brief consideration on page 217, where Wilson writes, "External trade also seems to have provided a not negligible source of revenue. The Musar Papyrus refers to a cargo of spices and luxury goods from India, valued before tax at over 9 million sesterces, on which a customs duty of 25% was payable." The statement acknowledged the existence of the ancient evidence, but did not contextualize or quantify this information. The model for the Roman economy, devised by Professor Keith Hopkins of Cambridge University, remains highly influential. Hopkins had argued that significant interregional commerce must have existed in the Roman Empire. This commerce explained how coined money extracted as tribute from wealthy provinces could be returned to the exporting regions to pay taxes in subsequent years. Hopkins imagined a ring of rich tax-exporting provinces, including Spain, southern Gaul, northern Africa, Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. Hopkins believed the expenditure of taxes at some distance from where they were raised stimulated a large volume of long-distance trade, as taxpayers secured money with which to pay taxes in successive years by the sale of produce. In 2002, Professor Schiedel from Stanford University agreed, and described Hopkins' tax and trade model as the only comprehensive attempt to explain the dynamics of the Roman imperial economy currently available. His restatement will remain the starting point for further research for the foreseeable future. Hopkins had argued that the Roman economy set scholars certain challenges. In the absence of conclusive ancient evidence, scholars would have to create deductive models to explain the function of the economy. In his view, it is not helpful to claim that the data are too diverse to make generalization possible. He maintained that source information had to be incorporated into reconstructions, and whatever model provided the best fit for the ancient evidence would have to be judged as the most convincing. He therefore argued that the proof or disproof of the model cannot be accomplished by illustration, and the only acceptable disproof of his reconstruction was by counter-argument. Hopkins suggested that a challenger would have to prove that there is no necessary reciprocal flow of taxes and rents paid in money on the one hand and trade on the other hand, or by putting forward a better, more economical, elegant, or comprehensive model. He further states, "I now think that a good model can be defeated properly only by other means, for example by showing that an alternative model will cover more evidence more elegantly with fewer moving parts, or more persuasively. In 2010, I offered the following solution to the ongoing debate about the Roman economy in my book, The Roman Empire in the Distant East. I introduced the Eastern commercial revenue model and explained how the bulk of Roman income was generated by custom taxes imposed on foreign trade passing through Egypt. This income was supported and enhanced by large amounts of newly mined bullion from the western provinces of the Roman Empire. Rome in the Distant East contains the following statement. Academics estimate that by this era the expense budget of the Roman Empire was between 800 and 900 million sesterces per annum. Around 600 million sesterces of this figure would have come from Egyptian revenues, with a further 380 million sesterces being collected and spent as provincial revenue funds. About a third of imperial finances were therefore funded by the tax profits of Eastern trade. Apart from the Egyptian revenues, there was no other large-scale transfer of provincial taxes to the Roman capital. The model has been further researched and was outlined and explained in The Roman Empire in the Indian Ocean, 2014, and The Roman Empire in the Silk Routes, 2016. The Eastern commercial revenue model seeks to provide a source-based solution for the Roman economy. The model is primarily drawn from ancient evidence and quantitative deductions made from source testimony and archaeological remains. It introduces and incorporates evidence for port facilities, naval technologies, sailing schedules, trade networks, commodity exchanges, cultural contacts, diplomatic relations, and the use and consumption of foreign goods in ancient societies. This reconstruction of the Roman economy is a major departure from established academic narratives that seek to marginalize Eastern trade. The plausibility of the Eastern commercial revenue model is that it places ancient evidence in its historical context. The evidence suggests that many figures previously dismissed by academics as dubious do in fact represent a historical reality. Strabo reports that by the early Augustan era, 120 Roman ships were sailing to India per annum, compared with fewer than 20 vessels in the Ptolemaic period. This increase is credible due to contemporary events, including major infrastructure developments at the main Red Sea ports. In 26 BC, the Roman governor Aelius Gallus oversaw the construction of 80 triremes and 130 troop transports at Arsine for the planned conquest of the Arabian Peninsula. Modern estimates for the construction cost of a large Roman cargo ship are 300,000 sesterces. This means that a single Indian cargo, valued at 7 million sesterces, could finance the construction of 20 new vessels. Pliny's figure of 50 million sesterces probably refers to bullion exports from Egypt to India. A 300-ton cargo of grain was worth 400,000 sesterces in Mediterranean markets, so a fleet of 120 ships loaded with a low-value cargo could easily export 48 million sesterces worth of goods. Eastern voyages were seasonally timed, and Pliny's figures might have been estimated from the quarter-rate customs tax collected during the months shortly before departure. In this era, all exports passed through the Koptos customs station, and private businesses bid for the right to collect the taxes. Alternatively, the figure could be based on a typical bullion or coin consignment multiplied by the usual number of departing ships. Tacitus confirms that in AD 16 the Emperor Tiberius addressed the Senate, concerned, "For the sake of jewels our wealth is transferred to foreign or hostile countries." In about AD 52, a Roman tax collector working for an Italian business family accompanied a Sinhalese embassy to Rome for reception and questioning by the Emperor Claudius. According to Pliny, the Sinhalese were particularly impressed by the quality of Roman currency. The Emperor Vespasian had people with knowledge of Eastern trade among his close advisers in Rome. The Praetorian prefect, Julius Alexander, was the son of a man who purchased the right to collect the quarter-rate import tax in Egypt. His brother Marcus managed a commercial business operating from the Red Sea ports. Information on trade values was therefore available to those close to the centre of imperial power and became a legitimate concern. Further evidence comes from Roman coin finds in southern India. The Kottayam hoard, found in a sand dune on the Malabar coast, consisted of a brass bowl containing 8,000 gold aurei, worth 800,000 sesterces in imperial currency. If this were a typical coin consignment, then 60 ships could have exported 50 million sesterces of bullion per annum. The figure suggests that half the Roman fleet sailed directly to southern India, where bullion dominated trade exchanges. Written accounts survive from ancient China. The later Han histories record how Roman subjects reached China by ship in AD 162. These travellers could have been the source for the Chinese statement that the Romans conduct a sea trade with Parthia and India, and their return gain is 10-1. This tenfold price increase between Egypt and India is confirmed by accounts of trade from the 16th century. A bullion consignment worth 800,000 sesterces would therefore have returned an Indian cargo worth 8 million sesterces. Pliny also suggests a 100-fold increase between the value of certain goods in Indian markets and their retail price in Rome. Diocletian's price edict indicates that purple-dyed silk was priced at more than 10 times the value of plain white silk. A 10-fold markup between India and Egypt, followed by a 10-fold increase after manufacture, would result in a 100-fold price difference. An ancient Chinese debate on policy conducted by the Han government survives in a work called The Discourse on Salt and Iron. A state minister described how the Chinese purchased pearls and ivory from territories more than 3,000 miles from their frontiers. He estimated that, calculating the costs in material and capital, it will be found that one article of foreign import costs a price 100 times its value. The Lang Shu records how a Roman merchant named Lun reached southern China by ship in AD 230. He offered the emperor, Sun Xuan, details about his native land and his customs, and Lun prepared a report in reply. This could be the source for the 7th century Qin Shu, which mentions 3rd century contacts and amends earlier information on Rome to report that India has trade with Rome by sea. Its profit is 100-fold. In this instance, the retail markup replaced the 10-fold import figure. The Musrus Papyrus contains a cargo valuation that was probably based on state prices determined in Rome. Instead of paying the quarter-rate import tax in cash, merchants could surrender a quarter of their goods to customs officials in Egypt. Many merchants took this option because they had most of their capital invested in their unsold cargo. The government shipped large amounts of this state-owned merchandise to Rome, where it was stored and sold in monumental warehouses close to the main thoroughfare through the city. These spice warehouses were known as the Horea Preparatoria. The complex was so large that its side elevation on the Sacred Way was only slightly smaller than the facade of modern Buckingham Palace. Comparing the dimensions of the building with other large warehouses, the complex probably held over 5,000 tons of spice when fully stocked. State prices were fixed at set amounts in the spice warehouses on the Sacred Way. This means that the Eastern import figures suggested by the Musrus Papyrus do not need to be scaled up to represent retail prices in Rome or other major centers of consumption in the Mediterranean. Further ancient evidence confirms the value of this commerce. The Musrus Papyrus gives the value of an incoming Indian cargo at almost 6.9 million sesterces after tax. A merchant guidebook called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea reports that Roman ships returning from southern India carried full loads because of the volume and quantity of pepper and malabathan. Pliny records that pepper was one of the least expensive eastern imports, with a value of 16 sesterces per pound, and a 200-ton cargo of pepper would therefore have cost 6.4 million sesterces in Roman markets. This confirms the value of imports suggested by the Musrus Papyrus. Juvenal also describes how the merchant, who is shipping grain or pepper, will load his ship up to the gunwale with goods, and run the risk for the sake of 1,000 talents, or 6 million sesterces. Even in the Satyricon, the writer Petronius has a character invest in Mediterranean ships that carry cargoes worth 6 million sesterces. This is the end of part 3. For further discussion, see part 4. How has the Eastern commercial revenue model explained the Roman economy? For more detailed information, see my books, Rome and the Distant East, published in 2010, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean, 2014, and The Roman Empire and the Silk Routes, 2016. Follow the link below. Thank you.